Welcome, everyone. Good evening or afternoon, depending on where in the time zones you're joining us from. My name is Kim Pittaway, and I'm the Executive Director of the MFA program. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. The University of King's College is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. We encourage you to find out more about the Indigenous lands you may live and work in. And a good resource to do that with is the website native-land.ca. Welcome to the first of our two class of 2021 MFA and Creative Nonfiction graduate readings. Our second one is tomorrow evening. We're delighted to have you with us as we settle in for the next hour for a wonderful selection of excerpts from works in progress by 9 of our soon-to-be graduating students. Tonight's session will be recorded and posted to the King's website so that you can share it with your friends, family, and other nonfiction enthusiasts in the days to come. As many of you know, the King's MFA is a 2-year limited residency program. Students gather twice each year for intensive residencies and then return to their homes where they work independently with support from their mentors and MFA faculty on their book-length nonfiction projects. Well, usually they return to their homes, though in the last year, the residencies have been online, and at the end of them, students have returned to their living rooms. Still, we've managed to have a remarkably successful year, with students, mentors, and faculty connecting coast to coast via Zoom for lectures, workshops, readings, and social gatherings. It's been a lot more fun and productive than I think many of us initially thought that it would be. The wonders of the electronic platforms like Zoom have also allowed us to welcome friends and family and the MFA curious to events like this one, no matter where they are. So we're delighted that you've been able to join us this evening. It's a pandemic side effect that I think we're all happy to have discovered, and that will be continuing even after things return to whatever kind of normal we eventually get back to. Okay, so on to this evening's program. Without further delay, we have 9 readers presenting works tonight. Their projects range from a major mineral discovery, coping with obsessive compulsive disorder, family memoir, our lives in cities, and more. Let's begin. Our first reader this evening is Jessica Brienne. Jessica is a Nova Scotian through and through. She has a Bachelor of Journalism and has been published by the Chronicle Herald, Unsinkable, The Coast, and the Nova Scotia Advocate. Jessica is currently working on her memoir titled Sanitized, My Life with OCD. Readers will learn about her irrational fear of contamination, which quickly turned obsession, and the decade-long journey of finding a diagnosis. Jessica never imagined she'd be writing this book in the middle of her greatest fear, a pandemic. The book is broken into 3 sections: Why Me, What Now, and What Next. This is not just her story, it's the story of every person trying to understand what they are going through, their family members, friends, or colleagues, anyone who's impacted by OCD. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to read an excerpt from from chapter 9. It's called A Chair with My Name on It. I have spent my whole life wanting and avoiding the hospital simultaneously. The desire to go to the hospital grew as OCD got worse, but so did the desire not to be there. Hospitals are supposedly some of the most sanitary places, but they are also a cesspool for diseases, illness, and germs that people aren't exposed to every day. And because of this, it was a breeding ground for obsessions and compulsions. A typical trip to the emergency department took hours or even days to decide to go. I was and am still afraid that going to the hospital would mean I would leave with something much worse than I went with. I developed a rule for myself. If after 2 days the problem I was concerned about wasn't fixed, I would ask my mother to take me to the hospital. If it fixed itself, I would be done worrying. 2 days weren't easy. My mind was always racing. OCD, 2 days could be life or death. You can't wait any longer. Don't let your fear of the hospital germs let these germs kill you. Me, it's probably just a random pain, pulled a muscle or something. No biggie, just wait it out. OCD, it's your funeral. Arriving at the hospital is like arriving at purgatory. It's not quite heaven, and it definitely still feels like hell. I feel good knowing that if something were going to happen to me, at least I'm in the right place for it to be figured out. At the same time, I'm absolutely terrified of what might happen to me upon entering. The hospital I frequent most is the Cobblecould Community Health Center in Sackville, Nova Scotia. When you enter, the smell of antiseptic and sanitizer hits, followed by the lulled sounds of people bored out of their mind after waiting for hours on end to be seen. The chairs line up leading to the nurse's triage, and I avoid sitting on them if possible, standing until it is my turn. When the nurse calls me in, I hope to see them washing their hands or wiping down the devices they will be using to test my heart rate, temperature, and the like. If I don't, OCD starts again. OCD, tell them they need to wipe it. Me, not now, this isn't the time. OCD, but if you don't, you'll die from whatever that patient has before you. Me, pretty sure they're just here for stitches. OCD, but their blood could be somewhere. Just say something. Me, we don't need them thinking I'm weird. Stop. I don't give in to OCD in this moment because I don't want the nurse sitting in front of me to know I have it. But it's too late. One of the first questions a triage nurse asks of you is, what medications do you take? This simple question gives me away every time and determines how I will be treated for the rest of my visit to the emergency department. When people hear you take medication for OCD, they begin to assume things. In a hospital setting, they assume you're a hypochondriac obsessing over health problems that don't exist. I may not be totally correct on this, I may be a little biased, but in my experience, that's how it goes. For example, one time I went into the ER for chest pains. I had told my parents I did not want to go, but they insisted. I had recently started a new medication, and one of the side effects they warned you about was severe chest pain that should be looked at by a doctor immediately. So when my parents insisted, I knew I should go. The problem, however, was my parents were too busy to take me, so I had to go with my sister Sarah. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't want Sarah to go, but my parents were more used to taking me and knew what to expect. I was also used to them taking me and felt comfort in the familiarity of that. When you get to the emergency department, a sign reads something along the lines of, if experiencing chest pain, see nurse immediately. I saw the sign, but I thought it would be ridiculous for someone in their early 20s to skip the line for chest pain that was most definitely not a heart attack. I sat at the end of the triage line with my hand clutching my chest as the pressure of my hand on it was helping ease the throbbing pain. That's when another patient in line realized I had chest pain and insisted I be let in first. Then another patient insisted my sister notify the nurse. As my sister attempted to get the nurse's attention without interrupting her current patient, the crowd in the emergency department began to fuss over me. One man even decided it would be a good idea to touch my back and tell me everything would be all right. As the crowd continued to fuss over me, I began to panic. People in a hospital room, for God knows what reason, they could have had the plague for all I knew, were touching me. By the time the nurse came out to see me, I was in a full-blown panic attack, hyperventilating, crying, everything. The nurse took one look at me and asked me how old I was. I told her my age, and she replied in a stern tone, something along the lines of, "That sign is for older people experiencing heart attacks, not you." Her next question was, "Did you take any drugs?" I told her I had recently switched my medication and about the warning on the bottle. I also told her the name of the drug. I can't remember it now because I've been on so many different ones, but it was a commonly known drug for treating mental illnesses. She asked how long I had been experiencing the pain, and when I answered that it had been since waking up, her tone got worse. She told me if I was actually having a heart problem, I would be dead by now, and that I was just having a panic attack and needed to get back in line to wait my turn. "You be dead by now?" is not what a person with OCD needs to hear, especially when in the middle of a full-blown panic attack. My head was spinning and continued to get worse as multiple people assured me the nurse was out of line and they would be reporting her for the way I was treated. By the time I got to the triage room, I was in a dazed fog and can't remember much from it. But I can tell you the nurse's attitude towards me did not change from what it was before. She still insisted it was just my mental illness causing me to feel this way. She did not ask any questions about what I thought the problem was or how I thought it happened. She just made an assumption based on my pre-existing mental illness that this must be that too. Moments like these make me rationalize my OCD, even though it is far from rational. After experiences like this, I think to myself, well, I better keep up the rituals because the doctors won't take me seriously even if I am dying. So do I want to go to the hospital? All the time, but never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Really, thank you for bringing us inside that experience and hearing that that voice of OCD as well. Thanks. Our next reader is Celia Milne. Celia is an award-winning writer. Her articles have been published in Maclean's, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, Chatelaine, Reader's Digest, the National Post, Sunnybrook Magazine, and elsewhere. Her book, Call of King Island, My Wild Inheritance, is a personal narrative about her complicated relationship with a rugged and remote island in the Georgian Bay. This tiny landform in the middle of nowhere can be sublime, but also savage. It is crawling with snakes, some of them poisonous. And there are other challenges: obstinate bears, fierce winds, no electricity, and grinding isolation. Why does she keep going back? It's in her blood and her bloodline. Welcome, Celia.
Thank you very much, Kim. And hello, everyone. This piece is set on said island. We are walking along the island path when we see something small and busy on the ground. It looks like a giant yellow thumb. Without arms or legs, the creature's urgent movement is propelled only by tiny ear-like flaps. It lurches, flails, and rolls like a Mexican jumping bean, throwing itself across the path. On a background of brown pine needles and dark green moss, its bright yellowness stands out, forgive me, like a sore thumb. The creature is oblivious to the two couples peering closely at it, remarking on its distinctiveness. "What do you think it is?" Erica asks. "No idea," I reply. We are 4 empty nesters with 7 adult kids between us, enjoying a pre-sunset visit. The critter doesn't care. For all living things, including us, time is fleeting. The critter doesn't care. As we watch, its frantic, stressed out ululations finally pay off. It arrives at nirvana, a blade of long grass pointing diagonally toward the sky. With teensy grasping antennae, it clutches the strand and hangs there, utterly still. We continue along the path to the cottage to mix ourselves a drink. In the time it takes for us to walk 20 paces, climb a few stairs, open the screen door, clink ice cubes into 4 glasses, pour in dark rum and ginger beer, squeeze lemon juice into each glass, and walk back to the path, the creature has experienced a spectacular metamorphosis. It is now a perfectly formed moth. Grand yellow wings, dappled with mauve markings, sprout from the sturdy, furry body. This is a pine imperial moth from the giant silkworm family. Judging by the sparsity of dark spots on her wings, she is female. This brave creature has advanced compulsively on her remarkable journey, prescribed by genes and nature. She started as an egg, the size of a pinprick, on a leaf in a tree. Her skin split 5 times and her color changed. She grew hair. Driven by insatiable hunger, she sought food, longleaf pine. She ate and ate and ate and grew to be more than 4 inches long. Once ready to pupate, she clambered down from the tree and burrowed into the soil under dead leaves. She became a hard brown chrysalis. Her cells differentiated and became mothy. Eyes, thorax, antennae, but no mouth. Sadly, she wouldn't need a mouth. She was now nearing the end of her life and had finished eating forever. She inched her way to the surface, looking for a place to grow wings. But here's the rub. It took a while for the blood to start pumping to her wings, and that's when we saw her. Wingless, legless, armless, here was a creature at her most vulnerable, flailing about on the path, all burning instinct and fierce determination. This is maternal energy laid bare, for the next phase of her life is reproductive, to attract a mate, to lay eggs. Hanging provocatively on her blade of grass, she calls out to the male moths on the island, "Swipe right if you like my pheromones." After drinks, we walk our friends down to the boat and say goodbye. Later that night, Keith and I return to the path to check on the moth. Our flashlight beams find her steady and resolute on her blade of grass. Look, she has grown another set of wings. Look again. They are darker than hers. It's a male. The two are mating. In less than a week, she will die. I pause to consider her terrible, wonderful freedom late in life. Only as time runs out, self-determination emerges. She'll spread those beautiful wings and choose the perfect place to land. Finally, mercifully, fleetingly, relieved of duty, free to fly. Thank you.
Just lovely, Celia. Thank you. That was quite charming, and makes me think of all of us in our little chrysalids right now, waiting for a little bit of spring warmth. Thank you. Our next reader is Dylan Reed. Dylan is fascinated by cities and the people who make them tick. In 2003, he co-founded Spacing, a quarterly magazine covering the urban issues facing Toronto, and he is now its executive editor. He wrote the book, The Toronto Public Etiquette Guide, to explore how people interact in public spaces, and co-founded the advocacy group Walk Toronto to help make Toronto a better place for walking. He will read from the book he is currently working on, tentatively titled Urban Jumble: Why Cities Need to Get Messy. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you. Okay. Michael McClelland leaned towards the front of 5 St. Joseph Street, near the intersection of Yonge and Wellesley in downtown Toronto, and points to the masonry, over a century old, between the orangey red bricks. It has tinted joints, he explains, showing that the builders took the trouble of coloring the masonry so that it blended in with the brick it bound together. The separation between those bricks, he adds, is much finer than would be normal practice today. The building we are standing in front of is a piece of hybrid architecture. Along this side street stands 4 stories of elaborate heritage brickwork, with decorative arches over every window and a spectacular pointed arch over the doorway. On either side of the main entrance are a trendy tea shop and a high-end bar. Along the laneway on the west side of the building is a wall of brickwork in the same style, but this one is entirely new. On the east side, a set of restored heritage storefronts along Yonge Street, the old main street that serves as the dividing line between East and West Toronto, have been connected to the main building by a discrete modern appendage. It's all very dignified, but shooting out of the middle of this muted brick wrapper is a shiny glass tower full of residential condominiums, 48 stories in total, with decorative undulating balconies trying to bring interest to its flat, blank walls. It reminds me of the super tall flower shot up by low-lying agave cactus just before it died that I saw once in Halifax's public gardens. I meet McClelland as the working day begins on a brisk September morning, while a steady stream of multi-ethnic young people exit the doors, presumably on their way to work in the many office buildings a short walk or subway ride away, or to study at one of the nearby universities. Occasionally, a middle-aged resident passes them the other way, returning home after taking their dog for a walk. McClelland, genial and soft-spoken, is the founder and a principal of ERA, the heritage architecture firm that managed the restoration and transformation of the heritage aspects of the project. The air around us is filled with a rapidly changing city's cacophony of construction. Kitty corner across the street, the whine of drills emerges from the restoration work on an apartment building, surrounded by scaffolding and wrapped like a gift in bright blue fabric. Next door, the scraping of shovels signals where the crew of a City of Toronto crane truck is digging a hole in decorative pavers in order to plant a tree. From the end of the street, on the other side of Yonge, the clanging and pounding sounds of new concrete and glass tower being erected punctuate the air. McClellan has agreed to talk about facadism, the practice of keeping the front of a heritage building while erecting a new structure behind it. I've chosen this building because I used to walk along the street occasionally, and, for almost 2 years, a set of astonishing steel buttresses held the thin, fragile facade of the old warehouse in place, while behind it, the rest of the structure was demolished and a completely new building emerged. At the time, it was the largest facade retention ever undertaken in Toronto, though other projects have since superseded it. Why bother with all that effort? McClelland explains that this facade was intended to show off the prosperity of the cartage company, Rawlinson's, that built the practical warehouse it fronted. Its balanced design, elaborate brickwork, and base of finished stonework is pretty impressive stuff, he says. It's actually really well constructed. That careful workmanship would be hard to reproduce in a modern setting. In addition to the expense of hiring the skilled labor required, its time-consuming construction would throw havoc into the process of a contemporary development project. And of course, it would lack the patina that comes from witnessing the growth of the city since Edwardian times. So losing the facade would mean losing a part of Toronto's history that was irreplaceable. As well, McClelland talks about the personal sense of place any building holds for the residents of a city. This building was once home to artists and others, and what is now a posh bar was once a gay club, part of a community that found its refuge in this once run-down part of the town. Keeping the facade maintains a connection between the location's past and its future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. I'm going to add facadism to my collection of metaphors yet to be developed. So thank you. Terrific. Next up is Deborah Phillips. Deborah is a conference speaker and author of the novel Argonauta, a portrait of a family torn apart by their own crisis of separation and identity during the 1970s October crisis in Quebec. Deborah has a BA in creative writing and literature from University of British Columbia. Her writing has been reviewed as richly lyrical and complexly plotted. Her current project is called Letting Go of the Ocean View, a memoir about attachment. Tonight's reading comes from a chapter excerpt, Mary and Betty, My Two Mothers. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary and Betty, My Two Mothers. Mary. I would love to meet Mary, Betty said the first time we spoke. I want to thank her. I have no intention of meeting the woman, said Mary. The day I told Mary about Betty, our relationship went off the tracks. We were dining at the Savory in Deep Cove, 20 minutes from downtown Vancouver. This is the worst night of my life. I thought you were going to tell me you were pregnant, Mary cried. I want to go home to Ottawa. How did I get it wrong? Hosting a reunion in my home with Betty and Robert, my birth parents, then telling Mary and Roy, my adopted parents, afterwards was not the ideal time. It's not the ideal time to announce that the past was open and the present included another family. The following day, after the airport departure, I took my Irish setter Rouge to the Deep Cove beach. She possessed a wild, irrational temperament, yet she was calm and composed this day as if I was her only focus. As I unpacked a basket of emotions, I thought about Mary. You think you know someone, especially mothers, like what to expect on weekends, what they tell their friends, all good things, but not all truth. My adopted mother was familiar and yet unknown. Growing up, other than keeping my room clean and vacuuming on Saturday mornings, the basics for pleasing Mary were not arduous. She never asked for much, just one thing. Just don't search for your family. But when I opened a brown-stained sealed envelope and read the bold letters of my birth name, Anne Marie Whipple, I knew I had to find my birth mother and her family. We thought you should see this since you're getting married soon, my adopted parents said. While I stood in an out-of-body state, they spoke with calm assurance. Everything I thought I knew about myself unraveled that day. Most likely your mother came from a wealthy family, Mary said, and your father may be a sailor. But you never try to find them, would you, dear? I mean, it's awful to think the hurt it would cause. Once you adopt a child, change their name, and provide for their life, digging up the birth family is not part of the agreement. This was the first before and after event in my life. Before, there was genealogical bewilderness, no knowledge of my history. After, I crossed over to an alternate reality, the way things might have been. It led me out of stories that weren't true, like your mother probably came from a wealthy family, to where do I find me? Who do I come from? How was I welcomed into the world? Did it matter? Instead, I got married, had a child, and became an entrepreneur in the art world until the artist himself wanted to become a minister. Betty, I love you, we love you, your father and I love you, Betty repeated over the phone. I was rearranging art in our gallery on Robson Street in Vancouver when she called. There were no clients on this rainy afternoon. I focused on nothing but her voice. I met my birth mother and father over the phone, I repeated later. We told the kids. They're excited to meet you, said Betty. I found out about the kids through my biological grandfather when I tracked him after spending hours writing letters to the Department of Social Services in New Brunswick. There was only one line in the letter I cared about. Your biological parents married 2 years after you were born. I want to meet Mary, Betty said during the first phone call. I want to thank her. How does a mother survive when she's given her baby away? How are we going to make our way back to each other? Maybe we should take a walk together through the historical St. John City Market with the roof resembling a ship's keel, and then stroll over to 260 Princess Street, where I was born. Betty wasn't ready for any strolls to the past just yet. While I had been on the move since birth, my biological mother had never been on a plane. But 4 weeks after the phone call, the two of them flew to Vancouver for their first visit. As I stood in the crowd at the Vancouver airport, watching with one eye the numbers light up on the screen for arrivals, I couldn't decide if we should shake hands or hug. They saw me first because of the no doubt here look. You look like your aunt. You look like your mother, your brother. I didn't see it. Well, you've opened up a whole can of worms, Robert's first words, but there's no mistaken identity. You are a Smith, and there's no doubt about it. Yes, but I am Anne Marie Whipple, daughter of the unmarried Elizabeth Whipple. Betty landed with a basket filled with teal blue wool, a pair of circular knitting needles, and a pattern for a fisherman's rib sweater ordered for me. Mary was a knitter and spent many hours making sweaters when I was growing up. Later, I found myself in yarn shops studying the knitter's world, the patterns of summer shells and cotton yarn and rib borders, and multiple knitting magazines. Who knew Vogue's best copy is found in Knitting Vogue? If they met one another, they would at least have something additional to talk about besides me. It took several days before Betty could let go of the trauma locked tightly in her heart. The day I was ready to take you home, you were dressed in a knitted cap and sweater I made for you. I was the only mother allowed to hold my baby. I signed the papers, believing I signed us out, Betty said. You are free to leave, the head matron told her. Plans for Anne-Marie had already been arranged. I was shipped off to an orphanage in Moncton, I told her. Betty left 260 Princess Street with her suitcase, wondering what to do next. She waited, walked, and wandered, and could not remember how she arrived at her parents' house. Where's the baby? Robert asked when he came from the military reserve duty. Betty told me repeatedly I was taken from her. The social worker's letter says the opposite. I was welcomed by Betty at birth, but only for a week. There were multiple caregivers before I landed in the arms of Mary. Betty's way of attachment to her baby girl was more babies. 6 boys arrived before the girl. My sister Kelly filled the void of her firstborn. What does connection look like? It was in the immediate aftermath of the first visit. It remained a muddle until I saw the red house. Hidden away at the end of a narrow gravel country road, set on an empty red shingled frame house. It was situated on the banks of the St. John River. A month after Betty's visit to Vancouver, I stood outside the red house on a sunny afternoon in August. I could almost hear the voices and laughter of children. Counting heads, I saw the 6 boys and 2 girls climbing down the side of the rocky bank. The older girl held the hand of her baby sister as if to protect her from the rowdy boys. I drew in a deep breath and captured this scene, a photograph stored in my mind. The physical sensation of being connected was so powerful, I wanted to spend more time in the place where I was born. I wanted to re-enter my birth family and even tried to take on that firstborn role. I resembled my siblings and felt a certain sense of belonging, but it couldn't be helped. I ended up playing the guest child in both families, adopted and biological. 20 years later, when my marriage ended, I stood in front of the same spot and asked myself again if the place I was born was the place where I belonged. I cultivated a way of being, place bonding with my family in New Brunswick over lobster and beer, in St. Andrews by the Sea on the coast of the bay, whose name I am embarrassed to pronounce. The town is one of those overly photographed places that magazines write as barely touched by time. There was a bookstore filled with maritime authors and their music. I could belong to this group, I thought, but I was still the guest child. I longed to see a rewrite of the story of Mary and Betty. They could talk about the beauty of New Brunswick, the world of knitting, and me. They could listen to each other's stories about teenage weddings, travels, or no landscapes, but the visits to Vancouver. If they had met, they could share in the role of my 2 mothers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, for bringing us inside that family yarn, that family story. Thank you. Our next reader is Robin Pacific. Robin is working on a second draft of her memoir and essays, Skater Girl, an archaeology of the self. She has a PhD in English literature and a master's in theological studies. Her work as a visual artist spans painting, drawing, video installations, and large-scale community art projects. She also has a part-time practice as a spiritual director. Skater Girl is her first book. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to read the last essay from the book. It's called, the book Skater Girl is the title of the book, and this last essay is called Going for the Gold. Until middle-aged, I loved to skate. I retained the ability from childhood to skim across the ice, the feeling of speed, the freedom from the constraints of gravity. But severe arthritis in my right knee put a stop to skating and occasioned years of pain and finally surgery and a long, slow recovery. I haven't skated in 30 years now, but I never stopped watching figure skating competitions. And I believe that if I had time for more than this lifetime, I could be a champion choreographer. I often fall asleep at night, fantasizing how I would choreograph singles, doubles, and even group figure skating acts. I can't bend down very low, and now my left knee bothers me some. My balance is still poor since the knee surgery. Nevertheless, I realized that I could probably, even in my 70s, go skating again. A friend loaned me her skates, and off I went to the Thornhill Arena Sunday public free skate. The first sign that all was not as it once was, I couldn't get the damn skates on. Somehow, in the intervening years, my feet had become so much further away from the rest of me. But with quite a lot of help from my partner Frank, who generously came and watched me, I eventually wrangled them on and laced them up. I managed to hobble around the arena, clinging to the boards, walking more than skating. Various people I passed who were watching their young children from the wings gave me their thumbs up and even applauded when I made it all the way around the rink. Even the young ones, as young as 4, were doing better than me. As Samuel Johnson said of women preachers, it's like dogs standing on their hind feet, not that they do it well, but that they do it at all. A woman came up to me and introduced herself as Michelle. We have beginner adult classes every Saturday night at 9, she said. Why don't you join us? I bought secondhand skates, knee pads, elbow pads, wrist pads, and a helmet. I started attending feeling nauseous with fear an hour or 2 beforehand, needing Frank to help me put on my skates, my pads, and my helmet, and to provide moral support. Each session, they give me a minder, perhaps afraid of lawsuits should I injure myself, usually a 15 or 16-year-old boy or girl. These youngsters are lovely and patient teachers. I alternate clinging to the boards or to their outstretched hands. Week by week, I am making incremental progress. When I finally skate all by myself across just the width of the rink, not holding on to my minder, I was elated. One night, I arrived at the rink to find out that the class was canceled, but Michelle told me a young woman named Melanie would still skate with me. Melanie turned out to be the perfect teacher, giving me slightly more challenging ice tasks, one after the other. Take my hand, we're going to skate around the whole rink. Now stand at the boards and push your skates out. Scrape them out to the sides. That's it. This is how you stop. Now skate 2 feet away from the boards, skate up to them and push your skates out. There, you've just learned how to stop. I knew if I could skate once a week with Melanie as my coach, my progress would soar. Around this time, Michelle told me about a documentary about 5 women in Kelowna, all seniors, who competed in the International Skating Union's 2018 competition in Oberstdorf, Germany. Apparently, these competitions are in 10-year increments, age 50 to age 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, and aged 80 and above. I'm now 75. The pandemic has put a pause in my plans to figure skate again. But when the lessons resume, I intend to enter the competition in the over 80 category. There won't be much competition. First, I'll be just 80, so I'll have the clear advantage of being among the youngest skaters. Also, many, if not most octogenarian skaters will be dead by then. I figure I have 5 years to own the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. As a lifelong non-skater, I admire you tremendously for getting on the ice, so thank you. Our next reader is Virginia Heffernan. Virginia is a former geologist who writes mostly about rocks for a living. In this scene, she is prospecting a couple of 100 kilometers south of the Ring of Fire mineral discovery that is the subject of her book. Welcome, Virginia.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for everyone for showing up. there's a little more context here. In this scene, I'm a young geologist. Peter is my boss, and it's the end of the field season in November. "I wouldn't take a boat out there," said the marina owner as he looked out over the ice crystals forming on the lake. "But I can't just leave Peter. He'll freeze to death. Will you come with me?" I pleaded, feeling younger than my 23 years. "Not my problem," he shrugged, retreating to the warmth of the rental kiosk, where his wife sat hunched on a stool, smoking a cigarette and staring in my direction with empty eyes. Holding back tears, I knew I had to make a decision fast. There was no palatable option. I wouldn't last long in the icy water if the boat capsized, but to try to reach Peter overland would require a 20-minute drive and a 1-hour trek through thick bush. Nevertheless, I jumped in the pickup, partly to get away from the apathetic boat owners. Berating myself for being too cowardly to stick to Peter's plan, I stopped briefly at the motel to grab a flashlight and let our hosts know we'd be late for dinner. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, keeping one eye on the odometer. After what seemed like hours, I pulled onto the shoulder where I dropped Peter that morning for his day of prospecting. I grabbed the flashlight, topographic map, and silver compass from the passenger seat. Pausing to set the compass needle for a direct line to Peter's rocky outcrop on the lake, I began to run-walk over the culvert and into the woods. I could sense Peter's anger and bewilderment building from 5 kilometers away as he squatted on the promontory, peering up the lake, ear cocked for the sound of a boat engine, his core temperature dropping as fast as the sun was setting. "I'm coming for you, Peter," I tried to reassure him through telepathic waves, but I felt sick with uncertainty. A few hundred meters in, shock stopped me in my tracks. Ahead lay a field severed down the middle by a ridge of scrub brush. When loggers clear cut, they often leave a buffer of trees lining the roadside to shield passerby from eyesore and themselves from complaints. That was the swath of forest I had just penetrated, assuming it would shelter me all the way to Peter. The ridge in the distance was slash, left over from the cut, branches too small for harvest that had been bulldozed together for burning. I recalled the game of pickup sticks I loved as a child, as I tried to figure out how to scale the pier without sending the sticks tumbling down and losing the game. Despite crashing through several times, I eventually made it to the other side, scratches stinging my forearms and calves. But my sense of accomplishment was short-lived. Ahead of me lay yet another slash pile, and then another. By the time I reached the forest again, my adrenaline was in overdrive, pushing me beyond my limits. The precarious climbing had set me back. It was dusk when I plunged back into trees spared by the chainsaw. I followed my compass needle deeper into the gloom. When the dying light made the needle impossible to see, I pulled the flashlight out of my pocket, but trying to walk and follow the compass in its weakening beam, which asshole forgot to check the batteries, I thought, proved impossible. I stumbled over branches and rocks. I heard wolves howling nearby. My heart sinking to my boots, I knew I must abort the rescue. By the time I returned to the truck, snow was falling thickly and the blackness was infinite. I had to get back to the motel to call the police. Revving up to 140 kilometers per hour, I careened along the winding road to the motel, windshield wipers a blur across my sightline. Screeching to a halt, the truck straddling 2 parking spaces, I lurched into the motel and called 911 from the phone at reception. With a shaking voice, I gave the dispatcher the roadside coordinates and agreed to meet the police there. Though it couldn't have been later than about 6:30 when we rendezvoused, it felt like the middle of the night to me. I wanted to drift off to sleep and let the police take over the hard work of finding Peter. Instead, I propped myself upright in the squad car, heat blasting from the vents as I relayed the day's events. The police officer in the driver's seat scribbled notes on a pad just like the one I carried every day to the field, while his partner poked around the culvert. Was I a criminal? I felt like one. I imagined what a charge of involuntary manslaughter would entail. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. I'm chilly just thinking about it. Thank you. Our next reader is John Bell. John was a Canadian ambassador to Ivory Coast, Brazil, Malaysia, and Canada's chief negotiator at the Rio Earth Summit, director of several companies and not-for-profits, and chief federal negotiator with BC First Nations. His memoir, Around the World in 35 Years, Scenes from a Diplomat's Life, is a collection of stories and anecdotes from his diplomatic days. What follows is a performance of an imaginary set of dialogues between JJ, possibly John, and Molly, JJ's fictional agent and wife, who is played in this reading by his sister, Robin Pacific, who you will recognize from an earlier reading. It's all about book contracts. Over to you, John and Robin. John, we need you to unmute, John. Be down at the bottom left of your screen.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, John. And
Can
Robin,
you see me?
Yes, we can see you as well. So John and Robin, over to you.
Okay. Well, I can't see you, but that's okay. On royalties, texting. JJ's texting Molly. Molly, it's JJ. Something's fishy going on with my royalty payments. Are you my agent or what? What the fuck? I'm confused. My book is flying out the door at Indigo. It's not even on the shelves. It's piled in a huge bin as you walk into the store. You can't miss it. Customers are buying my book like fresh corn at the farmer's market on a Sunday. I overheard a couple of elegant older women snickering at my book, The Governor General's Husband. It's the hottest thing since Peyton Place. I'm pissed off. My chum at Indigo says that 5,000 copies have been gobbled up since its release. You said we'd get 10%. Do the math. $50 times 5,000 books. That's $250,000. 10% is 25,000. My check is for a paltry 15,000. What's up?
What's up? I'll tell you what's up. You weren't listening when I said read the fucking contract. I've just emailed you a report by the Rocky Mountain fiction writers called Don't Get Caught in the Royalty Net. It says read the fine print. Publishing contracts calculate royalties in one of two ways: gross royalty calculations or net royalty calculations. We opted for net royalties, where the publisher can deduct certain pre-agreed costs from your royalties. I asked you to suggest reasonable specified expenses, but you were daydreaming about the antics of the Governor General's husband. Do you get it now?
Out of print. Hi, Molly. Please make lunch for the kids, Wilma, Sapphire, and Dylan, in case you forgot their names, so I can focus on my sequel to The Governor General's Husband. I've got the storyline, more juicy scandals. I just need to come up with a title.
Your sister conjured up the Gigi husband title. Call her, she's the creative one in your family. Remember your contract, the best contract you never read with Publisher Big? Rachel Belitsky at Publisher Big has an option for your next bestseller.
Publisher Big screwed me over big on my royalties. I want to switch to tiny print. Daniel Freeman, their head honcho, gets me and will give us a fatter royalty.
My dear JJ, be reasonable. Isn't it better to deal with the devil you know? Remember, Belitsky did send you on a cross-country tour. You read paragraph 2 in chapter 6, in over 100 of Canada's most prestigious seniors' residences. I love the quote from the New York Times Literary Review piece on the Governor General's husband. JJ is to seniors as J.K. Rowling is to kids. Magic.
Well, you've got one thing right, but Belitsky isn't exactly an angel. And anyway, It's just that I like tiny print better.
JJ, as I already told you, other publishers can make offers for the sequel. Publisher Big gets just first right of refusal. So it seems to me we could have a bidding war on our hands. The rights for the Governor General's husband revert to you when your book is out of print. Let me check the fine print and I'll get call after the kids' lunch.
Audio rights, texting.
JG, I read your contract again. I've sent you a copy from my go-to reference book on contracts by a guy called Levine. It's all laid out on pages 50 to 51. Quite frankly, I don't see the Governor General's husband being out of print anytime soon. Your book will probably outlast Lady Chatterley's Lover. Seniors go to heaven, but legions of others follow on.
So you're saying there's nothing I can do?
You did do one brilliant thing. You remember I was against it. I don't recall how on earth you came up with the notion of holding back audio rights, and I was surprised when Belitsky caved. Guess what? Jeff Bezos read The Governor General's Husband, loved it, and instructed his team at Audible to do a deal with us. They are talking big bucks. They're okay with you reading the book, but they prefer Tom Hanks, Clint Eastwood, or Robert Redford. Vamos ver.
Hey, check this out. I just saw the business section of this morning's paper. Unbelievable. There's been a merger between Publisher Big and Tiny Print, and guess what? The new CEO is none other than Daniel Freeman. We've got the best of both worlds.
Fantastic. I made reservations at your favorite restaurant and your sister is coming over to babysit. She's bringing Buddy. Let's celebrate. Anything more you want to say?
Yes, Pacific. I like to say what a joy it was to be associated with you and all my cohorts in MFA 2021. Talented, creative, and fun writers whose books will soon be published. We're inches from the finishing line. Imagine when someone asks you what you did in the year of the pandemic, you can say, why, I got a master's degree from the fine arts from King's College, Halifax. Robin.
Just a word of thanks to all the faculty and mentors. You steered our ship with efficiency, kindness, and grace. I will miss you. And to our fellow graduates, I look forward to reading everyone's book in a couple of years. Just remember, read the fine print. Happy trails, class of 2021, and Godspeed. Thank you.
Thank you both. I think that is, well, I know that is the first time that anyone has read their law contract exam at a reading. So thank you. Thank you both. We've got two more readers with us to round out this evening. Up next is Moira Walker. Moira's memoir is a reckoning with estrangement from her late mother, caused in part by the violence of her closeted father. A story of reclamation and connection, the memoir is called In Search of Love in a 4-kilogram Box of Letters. An oral storyteller, Moira is offering an oral story tonight called My Voting Career. In it, she acknowledges her debt to her mother for initiating her relationship with the ballot box. Welcome, Moira.
Thank you, Kim. My mother initiated my voting career when I was 19. While I'm indebted to her, I have some misgivings about the circumstances. Ours was a peripatetic family. Before I was 17, we'd immigrated 3 times, wandering from England to Canada, to the US, to Canada. Our move to the States was hard for Mother as she'd fallen in love with Canada. When our car slipped through the tunnel linking Windsor with Detroit for what would be a 6-year stay south of the border, she wept. The US just wasn't entirely to my mother's liking. For a start, she was denied the vote. Oddly enough, as a British subject, she'd been permitted to vote in Canada. The practice would end in 1975. While she was politically light, being disenfranchised saddened her. Her late father, after all, had narrowly missed becoming a British MP in 1931. Another difficulty was that Mother had grown disenchanted with Americans' political choices. She didn't take to LBJ, the Texan rancher who took over when Kennedy was shot, nor did she like the next president, soon nicknamed Tricky Dicky. It didn't help that Richard Nixon slicked back his hair or that his face acquired a damp sheen under the glare of television lighting. In addition, he had what in those days was called a 5 o'clock shadow. Neither shadows, nor stubble, nor beards had the standing they have today. Yet another challenge was that despite being raised by a nanny, taken to school by a chauffeur, and fed by a cook, Mother felt deeply that voice, nose and eye shape, hair color or texture, and skin tone oughtn't to matter. At her various typing jobs during our years in Chicago, she daily observed systemic racism. The final blow was the annual arrival of a bright yellow postcard sent by the federal government to all landed immigrants, or aliens as they were then called. The postcard posed a question in big, bold, black capital letters. Are you still aliens? Once a year, my mother had to agree her family remained extraterrestrial beings. Not surprisingly, Mother was relieved to return to Canada in 1970. 2 years later, the Prime Minister, a man who in her mind was everything President Nixon wasn't, called an election. Mother rose into the heavens. After a gap of too many years, she could again vote. Giddy with delight, she extended her voting pleasure. With 2 older daughters, also British subjects, half a continent away at university, and certain to be too busy to bother, she secured not 1, but 3 ballots. How did she manage? Hers was a traditional marriage, her paychecks being added to a single bank account held in my father's name. As he was often away, Mother took charge of paying the bills. We children would catch her standing before a window, holding a check superimposed over a sheet of paper, forging our father's signature. I didn't know the art of forgery is an inherited trait until I left an unlicensed, uninsured car with my younger sister. Soon it was back on the road. How? I asked. Oh, it was easy. I forged your signature. But I digress. Having obtained 3 ballots, my mother had to cast them. Of course, she didn't consult us. These were the days before cell phones, Instagram, email, chat rooms, and Twitter. And while our university residents had a communal telephone on each floor, Mother never called. Too expensive and, after all, unnecessary. Regarding her own ballot, she knew immediately. She'd vote for the Liberals, the party headed by the charming, playful, charismatic Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Her eldest daughter's vote was also not in doubt. Having belonged to a left-leaning group and once worked in a factory so as to connect with the economically oppressed, Virginia was clearly of the David Lewis New Democratic Party persuasion. Regarding her middle daughter, me, Mother again didn't hesitate. As I was her rigid, prudish, fastidious, narrow-minded, frumpish, irritating, and tiresome daughter, I was clearly in the Robert Stanfield Conservative Party camp. A man associated with Long Johns aligned perfectly with me in my mother's mind. So one woman cast 3 votes for 3 different parties in one riding, while the Conservatives took the Niagara area where Mother voted in 1972. Trudeau remained the Prime Minister, albeit of a minority government. In October 2015, exactly 43 years after my late mother cast my first ballot, Canada held a federal election. Had I only possessed her forgery skills and her panache, and had security not been what it is now, I might have secured an extra ballot. I'm certain my late mother would have been thrilled had I been able to cast a vote in her name for a party once again headed by a Trudeau. But limited to a single ballot, I did what I always do. I ticked the box beside the candidate representing the party Tommy Douglas helped to found, the New Democrats. Thank you.
Thank you, Moira. I admire your mother's commitment to that ballot box. Thank you. Our final reader this evening is Nadia Dale. Nadia is a writer and teacher based in Vancouver. At 16, she left home to sail as a trainee on the Norwegian tall ship, the STS Sorlandet. After an initial 8 months on board, she was unable to stay away. She returned for 3 subsequent voyages, overall sailing to 50 ports of call worldwide. Most days, you'll find her talking about sailing, writing about sailing, or staring longingly at the ocean. Welcome, Nadia.
A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. John A. Shedd, Salt from My Attic, 1928. I am out on top of the world and in the middle of the Atlantic, standing on a cable dangling beneath the mainsail's upper yard, 50 feet above the deck. The ship yawls dangerously in the rollers, but I feel the motion less up here. I can't see my shipmates as the clouds are obscuring the stars, engulfing us in darkness. I feel their weight though, as they shift their bodies to steady themselves, causing the foot rope beneath us to sway. Bit by bit, we heave the heavy sail vertically and tie the wet masses of canvas onto the yard. Wind and rain lash our faces as we work. We can smell the beginnings of a storm. Each of us wears a harness. We climb freely, but once on the foot rope, a 3/4-inch cable sized and seized and tarred, which we have to balance on, we clip our harnesses onto the safety cable behind us. We have to be clipped in, as we cannot hold on and work at the same time. As I lean my torso onto the yard, I reach into the darkness to grab another bite of leaden canvas. I am soaked to my core. My clothes, zip-off shorts, an old t-shirt, and deck shoes, we were technically still in the tropics, cling to my sodden skin. I hardly notice. I feel a grin etched on my face and adrenaline pumping through my body. I have never felt more alive. After successfully folding the canvas onto the yard, I tie my first gasket, securing the crumpled, wet sailcloth in place. I slide my hand along the cold, smooth steel, feeling for more gaskets to secure the sail. Finally, my fingers brush the next buntline, which is rough and damp. I maneuver my body around it to reach the gasket on the other side. From what I can feel as I enter along the yard, the stow is messy work. The heavy canvas has been folded haphazardly and the sail bulges unevenly. Usually, we pride ourselves on meticulously rolling the sail into itself until the stowed sail looks as smooth as one of the captain's hand-rolled cigarettes. But today, our only concern is function. Once we finish tying the last gaskets to secure the stowed sail to the yard, I make my way back to deck, holding tight, hand over hand as I scale down the shrouds. My sense of belonging to the crew and to the ship is visceral. We have been at sea for over 7 months, and although we should all have our sea legs by now, they are about to be tested. We departed the safety of the protected Hamilton Harbor, bound for Ponta Delgada in the Azores, a collection of volcanic islands along the mid-Atlantic ridge. This will be our longest sail yet, 16 days on the open ocean. As we departed Bermuda, an intensifying low-pressure system was building to the north of us, bringing gale-force winds of over 35 knots to lower latitudes in the North Atlantic and up to over 50 knots off Nova Scotia and Iceland. This weather formed a massive cold front. A second low-pressure system to the northeast was also moving across the Atlantic, and a series of lows were developing over the United States. These pressure systems eventually caught up with us. The front came in thick and fast, with heavy rain and strong winds gusting up to 57 knots, or 105 km/h winds. As the storm progressed, the ship rolled with increasing intensity. With each wave that crashed over the side, icy water spilled onto the deck. The officer's commands are inaudible over the roaring of the wind. We are sailing in the fiercest weather we have yet encountered. Storm protocol begins to take effect. The first step is to take in sail. Too much canvas, too high up in the rig, and we would risk capsizing. Were we not able to take it in quickly enough? Many a ship before us had made that very mistake. We leave the lower topsail set to balance the ship and dampen the rolling. The lower topsail above deck and the ballast below should be enough to stabilize the vessel in rough weather. It's early in the storm, and the weather isn't yet rough enough to dissuade the crew from letting trainees into the rigging, which is how I found myself on that blustery night, 50 feet above the deck and soaked to the bone. After the storm our watch shift ends and we are relieved by the next watch. Good Wacht, we chant. Good Wachtskavada, responds the oncoming watch. We sleep very little that night. There is too much motion and too much noise. I hear crashing, smashing dishes from the Banyere pantry. We roll and pitch, all the while the sound of metal thudding against metal reverberates through the ship. A faint sloshing echoes from the ballast below. The Banyere floor is strewn with blankets and backpacks which have slid far from their owners. I have propped my bunk at a 45-degree angle to prevent myself from tumbling to the floor. With every pitch, I feel my stomach drop as if on a roller coaster. As the waves increase in size and frequency, the captain makes the call that the safety lines need to be rigged. These lines are set up at waist height, parallel to deck. 2 safety lines are strung fore and aft and fastened to steel cleats on either side of the ship. Periodically, there's a line tied port starboard to keep the safety lines taut. They act as additional rails to grip onto as the crew move across the deck. As I watch my shipmates struggle, I think back to our very first day on board and the warnings the chief mate had given us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. That's quite a scene for us to end our evening on tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our readers this evening. I think the close observation we've seen in these readings, the detail, the emotional honesty, humor, the exquisite description gives us a terrific sense of the mastery of the skills of nonfiction. So I thank you all for your wonderful readings this evening. I thank all of our attendees for their attention as we've spent this evening journeying across time and around the world. We hope that you enjoyed this evening's offerings, and we hope to see some of you at tomorrow's readings as well. Good night, everybody, and thank you for a wonderful evening of terrific readings. Thank you. Good night, all.